Rafael Schvartzman, who's our Regional Vice President for Europe. I'm sure many of you are familiar with him. I'm Chris Gota, I'm in the comms team, and if you have any questions, we'll be taking them after Rafael has spoken for a few minutes. So we're going to begin straight away. Let's go.
All right, good afternoon, and again, thank you for coming here. As Chris says, I want to give you a brief overview of some of the key issues facing Europe in the context of competitiveness, which is something we've heard a lot about since the publication, actually, of the Draghi report last year. In short, competitiveness obviously matters a lot to aviation, and competitiveness in the air transport market, obviously, as well, is critical to our economic success, let's say, right? And I think being in India is a good place to be, I would say. This is because, again, the air passenger market actually is highly transparent and competition is high. While product differentiation opportunities are very low, this leads to low margins and demands being high price sensitive, right? So again, what are the results? An increase in cost creates huge difficulties for the airline business, right? I think you are all familiar with this principle, I would say. If airlines have to pass through these extra costs, which given very tight margins, they often have to do them. This is then likely to obviously have an impact and depress the demand for travel. So fewer passengers means fewer routes, fewer frequencies, which also means fewer jobs and economic opportunities generated by the airlines. The connectivity that creates so much prosperity across Europe is impaired by the constant cost increases weighing airlines down. The opening sentence of the transport chapter of the Draghi report states that well-functioning transport networks and services and a prosperous transport industry are crucial to the competitiveness of the entire EU economy. And he goes on to state that transports enable prosperity of other branches of the economy. His analysis is confirmed by research from the Air Transport Action Group, which shows aviation supports 15 million jobs and generates $1.2 trillion in GDP for Europe alone. It follows, therefore, that to improve European competitiveness, we must improve the competitiveness of the European air transport. So I'd like to examine the four key areas where competitiveness can be enhanced. And here you see the four of them: consumer regulation, or EU 261, sustainability, specifically in the case of Europe, obviously refueling EU, taxation, airport and ASP infrastructure. These four areas represent cost burdens on the competitiveness of European air transport, and they, as a result, are actually the result of political choices which actually regulators and politicians have within their power to actually improve. So let's start with the consumer regulation, which most of Europe is actually subject to the EU 261. So EU 261 is long overdue for significant reform. It is hard to think of a regulation that is less in tune with the EU desire to be more competitive. 261 adds to at least 5 billion euros of cost while having no effect on reducing delays and cancellations, other than to ensure airlines cancel flights after 3 hours, which might be otherwise take to the air. EU 261 has been modified by judges more than 80 times. It is a mess, and as we speak, improvements are on the table awaiting the approval of the EU transport ministers. Our key request is to modify the threshold for compensation. We would like to see this move from the 3 hour to the 5 hours for short-haul flights, and from 5 hours to 9 hours for long-haul flights. This would be, in our view, a win-win in most circumstances. Well, why? Because, for example, if an intra-EU flight gets delayed by 3 hours, then the airline will cancel and he pays the compensation, even if the plane could have been in the air a bit after those 3 hours, right? So in fact, we think the majority of flights that are cancelled at 3 hours might be able to get going within the 5 hours framework, on the principle that most passengers would prefer to get to the destination better late than ever. Modifying the threshold would be a definite improvement. Our key message to regulators is approve the threshold reform. It will reduce reduce flight cancellations. It will also cut costs that have to be paid for by airlines and consumers, and thus help the economic viability of marginal routes around Europe. Now let's turn to sustainability. Aviation is committed to reaching the net zero 2050, right? Net zero by 2050, but getting there will take a massive collective effort from industry and government. The EU have set the toughest environmental targets and mandates in the world. Logically, you would think they would have already put world-leading support in place for the industry to meet these targets, but unfortunately, that is not the case, and that is making the cost of sustainability needlessly high. The current mandate of SAF use, 2% rising to 6% by 2030, it's an obligation on fuel suppliers that is simply passed straight on to airlines in their existing jet fuel contracts. As a result, there is no transparency in the market, and airlines are paying $1.7 billion extra in compliance with this cost for SAF. And actually, if this money would have instead been diverted to buying more SAF, it would reduce CO2 by an additional 3.5 megatons of CO2. Every extra dollar being spent over the odds on SAF diminishes the ability of airlines to purchase SAF beyond the mandate or invest in other sustainability measures. We need more transparency in the SAF market, and this issue will be covered actually in more detail later on in the sustainability media briefing. The inflexibility of the regulation insisting on fuel being supplied equally across Europe also adds cost. More flexibility at minimum an intra-EU book and claim system, for example, would help airlines access more SAF and for SAF to be scaled up where it's most efficient to do so. So simpler and more streamlined reporting requirements would also help, especially with regards to anti-tankering. Fourthly, sustainability regulations need to be harmonized. There is a mismatch between RefuelEU and the EU emission trading scheme. At the moment, for example, an airline flying from Orly to Madrid can only access the ETS SAF benefit if the SAF is provided physically at Orly, which fuel suppliers today are not obliged to do. The ETS rules need to change to cater for flexibility, which has been granted to the fuel suppliers. These 4 steps will help improve European competitiveness without diminishing any commitment to sustainability. On the contrary, they will make it far more likely that when we can actually reach the EU targets, and in the case of a book and claim system, the EU have the opportunity to be the first movers and establish goals, best-in-class regulation to make this work. Taxation is another additional cost burden that is under control of governments. And it has been another great year for tax collectors, less so for passengers and airlines. We have seen tax rises in France, the UK, and with Netherlands and Belgium also pushing to increase their taxes. But at least the picture is mixed, right? Sweden has abolished its passenger tax, effective this July, and Germany is considering following suit. And we also saw taxes on airlines like cut in Hungary and Italy. So airlines pay hundreds of billions of taxes every year. We are committed to paying our share. But passenger taxes are self-defeating. They restrict connectivity and thus general economic activity, which supports the overall tax base of a nation. The cost of airports and ANSP's infrastructure are increasing year on year, with leading performance improvements to show for it, and the profitability in the value chain is completely unbalanced. Airlines make an average return on investment capital of less than 7%. That's for a sector that is risky. So in theory, if you're risky, returns should be higher, right? And in good times, obviously, you are able to recover through those better times, let's say. Europe airports are far less risky sector, and they're actually making more money. So for the most profitable airports, we have examples like Lisbon with a return on capital employed of 21%. or Lyon with 15%, or Athens with 14%. So remember that many airports have headwinds, tails you lose approach to charges. If their profit exceeds their the expected returns, they get to keep the additional money. But if they fall below expectations, airport will try to recoup them later through higher charges. Effectively, their return is nearly risk-free. Whereas anyone who has ever held an airline shares will confirm that airlines are certainly not risk-free. The current system does not incentivize or stop airports from earning unjustified excessive returns. That's one of the reasons we have called for a revamp of the European Charges Directive. ANSP charges, as the chart on the slide shows, are rapidly increasing. Charges for 2024 were 2 billion euros higher than in 2019, almost 25% more, to manage actually 0.3 million fewer aircraft movements. So we saw double-digit increase in charges across most of the ANSPs in Europe. Some of the biggest price offenders actually in these price increases are Switzerland, for example, with 18% more than the next highest charging country. And then also we see the patterns in the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Germany, which are very expensive, particularly when their performance is taken into account, especially when you talk about France and Germany, who are responsible for more than 50% of all delays in Europe. What is even more dismaying is when you look at the latest performance planning under the EU regulation for these states. They are all part of FABEC, who collectively have failed to deliver compliance plans for the next performance cycle, the RP4, 2024 to 2029, each of which have planned to fail to meet both capacity and cost efficiencies. What is even worse, delays are consistently increasing. ATC capacity was the major cost of delay in 2024, accounting for 8.9 million minutes. ANSPs are not hitting the modest performance targets they've set for themselves, as the chart from Eurocontrol clearly indicates. Excepting for the COVID years, the last time Europe's ANSPs met their delay target was in 2013, when the iPhone actually was the latest thing, and Alex Ferguson was still the manager of the Manchester United. So I think my iPhone now is 16, so quite a lot. The gap between their targets and reality is approaching fantasy levels now. You can see it from the graph, actually. So indeed, Eurocontrol has warned that the best case scenario this summer will see delays reduced to 2.02 minutes per flight. Still well overdue, the target. And there are no penalties for this continued object failure. It is important to note that while we say 2.02 minutes per flight of average delay, that doesn't sound so bad, right? But that is equivalent to 70,000 minutes of delay for the day as a whole, and that can also be expected or translated into 15 to 20 minutes of delay per delay flight. Basically, if your flight is delayed, it's going to be delayed significantly. We'll see it this summer, right? These sort of delays are unacceptable, and all the more galling as costs continue to rise, as you saw at the graph. Europe's competitiveness will always be hampered unless it tackles the chronic inefficiencies of its ANSPs through targeted measures. So finally, I will conclude with some final thoughts on capacity. Globally, the aviation industry is growing. We are here in India, which is looking to turbocharge its growth. This is the most populous country on the planet, with a growing middle class that want to travel. If Europe wants to get its share of that travel, it needs to ensure strong connectivity to India. Yet capacity in Europe is facing a crisis. Much needed airport expansion remains on the drawing board, whether it is Lisbon, Poland, or Heathrow. And some of our most important hubs face actually challenges to maintain their current capacity. Amsterdam being the most tragic case. You all know of the long-standing legal challenges that the industry has been forced to undertake to ensure the Netherlands stands by the international agreements and proceeds with a proper balanced approach to noise and skid load. The lack of capacity is just one example, along with challenges I have just explained in the presentation. Why Europe will be the slowest growing region over the next 20 years. That slow growth could fall even farther if these competitiveness problems are not addressed. The Draghi report correctly identified many of the key issues Europe is actually needing to tackle to restore its prominence and prosperity. Many of these difficulties are external, in the face of major geopolitical, technological, and demographic challenges. But many of the competitive problems faced by air transport are self-induced by European politicians. And the positive side to that is that Europe also has the means to reverse those problems if sensible regulatory and fiscal solutions are put in place. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rafael. Who has some questions? Yes, sir. There's a microphone coming now. Thank you.
Hi, it's John Milligan from the Irish Independent. I just wonder what kind of resistance do you think you'll see to any changes to EU 261, because it can be seen as a very much win-win for consumers. And I'd imagine that there will be significant resistance to altering it when it is seen in that light. And also in terms of the single European sky, it's been going on for years and years. You know, do you ever think you'll see a resolution to it, that you will ever see it get pushed through?
Well, I think on the resistance side, obviously, we have seen that they have not been able to come to an agreement. So clearly there is a divided group, right? I mean, definitely there is no alignment in terms of the proposal that was put forward by the Polish presidency. You're right, there is a strong drive towards the consumer, but you know, when you were with the same intention as I mentioned before, we would like to improve actually the delays, you know, the way we are handling delays and compensation, and we said it before. I mean, if we could have a threshold that is more adequate to what you already touched, which is we don't have a single European sky. We know summer is going to be 41% more delays than last summer, and we knew it before last summer. It's not that we know just after the summer. We knew it already more than a year ago that there was going to be those delays. So we are the cause of those delays, right? And we know the sources. I just mentioned it. So definitely, if we want to address it, it's not just by either maintaining a rigid or stricter compensation mechanism, because it's physically impossible to not have those delays, right? So again, and I think there are states who are actually on the right side, if I can say, right? And because we tend to generalize the EU, I know there are some relevant states who are actually supportive of finally, you know, updating this very old regulation. Again, the threshold being one of them, but there are also the exceptions, right? I mean, there are a lot of exceptions that have not been updated that need to be accounted for, that will pass if this new regulation is put in reform, right? So again, I think there is a split room now. I understand that the discussions are ongoing, and this week there will be obviously a ministerial discussion on the 5th, but it doesn't seem to be an agreement at this stage, right? So there doesn't seem to be an agreement to move forward with the modifications that we believe are going to be better for the consumers, because the airlines are also going to be able to perform better. As I said, examples of 3 hours to 5 hours. I mean, you know, it disincentivizes the airlines to actually, you know, at one point is better just to cancel the flight, right?
Thank you. Yeah, and I think the point you made there about the connection with SCS is really interesting. I mean, it threatens to be the same. There are long-standing regulatory reform that was on the table for a long time, and it just gets watered down into a political compromise that doesn't really deliver. So that would be our worry. Okay, any other questions? Yes, madam in the front here. Thank you.
This is Sangeeta Saxena, editor, Aviation and Defence Universe. I wanted to understand, there are quite a few instances when we've seen labor shortages and workforce challenges in European airlines. How does IATA plan to solve that for the rest of the world? Because we have connecting flights between Europe and India, and this is a problem we've been facing very regularly.
Yeah, well, effectively, well, you on one side have the very positive trends or very strong and growing aviation market. On the other, obviously, is bringing up all those resources. It is still a challenge even in Europe, right? I mean, not probably as serious as a faster growing market. I think, obviously, IATA has a set of training programs that are supportive of, right, and bringing the right talent for aviation. We also are, and I can speak for the European region, we, in some cases, because the European region has, I was talking mostly about the EU, which is the most, let's say, troubling legislation these days to actually perform for a better industry. But the European region also includes the Central Asia and Russia CIS countries. And in those countries, very much similar to what you said, so we work with the authorities to try to see how can we support and bring the right talent through training, through, in some cases, some consulting projects that can help bring in, the right resources into place or the right setup. So again, it's obviously it's not a task only for IATA, and I think through our training and our support to many of these countries, we are trying to support and help.
Thank you. Ian, thank you. Oh, no, there's a lady behind you who's going first. That's fine. We'll come to you, sir.
Okay.
Right, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. It would be close to the previous question about the compensation because it's still a matter. I still don't understand why you want to go through 3 to 5 because, as you say, France and Germany are all like the most late in our brain area. So if you allow them to be like more late by saying that 5 hours late would be like a good option, how they will be like more on time? I don't see the point.
No, let me clarify, maybe I was not clear. The causes of delay for Europe, France and Germany's air traffic control systems or these are the ones that are causing the delays, not that I was referring to is the NSP delays that we are facing in Europe. More than 50% of them are related to France and Germany on their capacity. So that's why, and actually the airlines are just being affected by those delays, right? Lack of capacity, for example, right? I mean, ANSPs that are not able to provide the capacity needed in the time needed, right? So that's why the summer delay, the summer is just an example, but is the summer delays in Europe intensify because they don't have the capacity to provide the services. Then when those delays occur, the airlines have to struggle to be able to comply and make the flights or keep the schedule on time, and it becomes we are seeing that if we extend it, considering that we know, as a graph I showed before, that there are going to be delays because they're not complying with the targets, right? It will allow the airlines to probably able to bring aircraft into service within the 3 to 5 hour framework, and compared to what the majority of them, compared to if you keep it at 3 hours. Does it help to, I guess, understand, right?
And if you want more information, you come and find me afterwards and we can go through that in more detail. So Ian, thank you.
Yeah, Ian Taylor from Travel Weekly in London. Rafael, you made an eloquent case for the impact of all the costs piled on carriers and the impact on competitiveness. But if you look at the UK, it appears to defy that link between costs and growth. So the UK has the highest tax per passenger, air passenger duty, which on business passengers on long haul is hundreds of pounds. But the UK aviation market has come back more strongly post-COVID than Germany, France, really any of the major aviation markets and only really the markets which are where holiday destinations are very important, Greece, Spain, Turkey, because there's been the explosion of the airports there, have come back more strongly. So I know that when airlines talk to the UK Treasury and say you're making us uncompetitive with APD, the Treasury says, well, I'm sorry, your growth figures, your record passenger numbers say that it's not doing that. What do you say?
Well, first of all, the APD is such an old, right, it's a long story, but at the same time, we're talking about the markets, and I was talking in the context of all of Europe, first of all, right? So if we talk about the markets, not all of them, especially after the pandemic and with the geopolitical situation today, are performing in the same way, right? We cannot, I mean, some markets are better, but for Europe as a whole, connectivity is key as a whole, right? And if I use the example, I was recently, well, we've been working very closely with Germany. As you all know, Germany being the biggest the biggest economy in the EU, right? Concerned about their industrial situation, right, and capacity. Air transport in Germany has not recuperated, one, right? And that is due to the cost, right, structure. They identified that they are not competitive enough, one. Two, if you look at the way they have brought the aviation connectivity to a very delicate situation, not only that they have not recuperated, if you look at even domestic, which for a German economy is structurally critical because it's a diverse industrial base, right? They're not concentrated in one place. So 52, they have lost, Germany has lost domestic connectivity by 52%, right? And if you look at, if you take out Munich and Frankfurt as a hub, the domestic connectivity has been reduced over 70%. So now they're struggling to bring back that connectivity, right? Because obviously those industrial areas are sitting in the regions. They're not sitting all in Frankfurt and Munich, right? So this is an example of, you know, they have increased the cost of doing business there so much, and they have penalized that obviously has not been, it is not economically feasible to maintain that domestic connectivity, and that has impacted the economics as well of the country. That's one example of the largest EU economy, right? So again, the you mentioned the UK APD, right? But again, yeah, today is booming, but tomorrow, you know, that at the same time we're also trying the airlines to pay for the transition to sustainable industry, right? And I mentioned before the cost of fuel or the cost of SAF and the accessibility to SAF. So it might be good to have an APD to fill in the, I guess, the general budget, but it doesn't help in any way to transition to a sustainable air transport system, right?
Thank you. Yes, please. Is that Ali? You got it back here in time. Thank you.
Hi, Justin Cook from Brave and Travel News. We're obviously operating in a very dynamic market with regard to the overall sort of trend of trying to drive more seamless and borderless travel experiences. You just mentioned connectivity being key. From a passenger perspective, I think that is critical. How does IATA foresee these developments impacting aviation growth, both in terms of volumes and operational efficiencies? And what role are you going to play in facilitating the integration of perhaps digital travel credentials across governments and airlines?
Well, we foresee obviously digitalization as being one of the critical solutions to actually be able to not only improve the passenger experience, but actually be able, when I mentioned Europe capacity, to be able to do more with what we have, right? The infrastructure that we have. I mean, there are examples in that sense. We know that that brings a thought to me when you mentioned that is we are struggling to bring in the capacity for areas like airports like Lisbon or Warsaw or Heathrow, right? But at the same time, we're not also moving maybe fast enough on the digitalization of, again, and probably in that sense, IATA has the One ID initiative, right? Where we do believe very much in, especially in the context of the EU, where we can actually have a very large market, standardized, and actually be able to show a leadership role, I would say, in that process. We have, as I said, the One IATA initiative, and we try to definitely work with the different authorities. But again, this has to be, and I know the EU is working, but maybe not fast enough, right, in the initiatives to bring in the digitalization that we see.
Yes, please.
Yes, Ricardo Jiménez Maso from Race Online. Has there been any progress regarding the possibility of passing out the cost of delays to airports or NSPs when they are at fault?
Very good question. Well, actually, it brings me back to a conversation. You know, it was I think before it was Ian, you mentioned something about you know, the cost of not having single European sky and delays and all that. In a discussion with some authorities, they recognize, you know, informally, I would say. So you know, I'm not quoting any authority in particular, but the current framework actually doesn't allow for this to happen, right? And that's what the governments need to change, right? You know, we are, the airlines are they are the customer-facing organization, right? And we are the only ones having to compensate for any of the delays, even many of the ones that I mentioned before, right? I mean, if we're going to have the type of delays we're going to be seeing in summer, I mean, who is going to be paying for it? It's going to be the airlines, right? So you're totally right, but it requires governments to, and this is why I said informal conversations, they recognize that there is a need for reform to be able to, you know, have accountability of the cost of these delays. And today we are not able to, and therefore the airlines are paying a higher price. So the solution for us, again, when we look at this revision of EU 261, right, we're looking just to how do we compensate, but we're not addressing the cost of the delays as well, right? And again, airlines are not trying to compensate, we're compensating. The issue is, are we addressing actually the main issues and who are responsible for it?
Yeah, I just put that chart up again because you can just see the delays going ever up. The fantasy target is apparently coming down. But does anyone looking at that track record seriously believe they can deliver? And that's just going to mean more and more payments being made by airlines, as you say, because EU 261 encourages that, but the regulation that's supposed to make the ANSPs perform is utterly failing.
And if you, by the way, if you look in paper, it might look good because it says the delays, the orange is the target, right? The orange line and well, all these little lines are targets, right? Of the RP4 I'm talking about. So look at how is the expected performance in 2025. So why are you putting targets at that time, right? And you are not addressing the underlying cause, right? But it has been a pattern already, so it's not an exception. The exception is actually complying with the target, trying to reach the target.
Thank you. We've got time for one or two more if there are any. Otherwise, we'll call it a day. I don't see any more questions, so we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Rafael. Appreciate your time, as always. And thank you for your questions. If you have any follow-up questions or desire more material, please come and find me in the media briefing room, in the media working room, and I'll be happy to help out. Thank you. Bye.